YouTube, what's going on? Kyle here checking in with another video. Today we got Swamp Stories back again. And this right here we got Satan's Disciples, Chicago's vicious crew that's taking over the South Side. Just gonna get into it.
When you think of Southside Chicago, a few things may come to mind.
We finna finesse what we gotta finesse. We thinking streetwise.
You gotta be ready for what's coming, you feel me?
Whether it's King Von, FBG Duck, FYBJ Main, no, I'm just kidding. But you know who are the most talked about sections. Of course, these are terrible conflicts that just never seem to end. However, Southside Chicago has another side to it that's equally as bad, but is never covered by the media. A side that even the guys I mentioned would get goosebumps if they heard the name. This is the real Southside Chicago. But before we get into it, let me run the intro.
The real Southside Chicago. Boy, stop playing, boy. Forget your ass, boy.
The story begins in the 1940s, a very important time in American history. After the Great Depression, thousands of Eastern European families flooded to Chicago to work in manufacturing. The vast majority settled along the south branch of the Chicago River, from Pilsen down to Little Village. By 1948, Pilsen was a nearly 100% Polish and Slavic neighborhood. But then in the 1950s, many Hispanic families began moving in. Because humans are stubborn and multiculturalism was a foreign concept, the local families were not too thrilled. Many Eastern Europeans began moving out to suburbs like Cicero and Oak Park, while the Mexican families moved in. Tensions in the area were high, and the Polish teenagers decided to get together and form an alliance that they thought was necessary. So in 1959, about 12 Polish teenagers got together and created the Satan Disciples, also known as SDs.
Satan Poland? Poland? They call it so. That's crazy. I would never want to be named after that.
They chose the name to scare off anyone who thought about messing with them. This is because they figured that they needed protection from the influx of new immigrants in the area. But once they formed, they realized that the Mexican teenagers had no intentions of being their rivals at all. In fact, they actually thought they were cool, and they even wanted to join their side. So within their first year of existence, the SDs became 50%.
After you work out, you can feel worn out. Reach for core power and rise to a whole new level of recovery. High quality
percent Mexican in the neighborhood was united as one. This is when the SDs laid out their mission and rulebook for all members. Their number one rule was obviously no snitching, but who cares? But their second rule was one that's very unique. Satan Disciples members were encouraged to get jobs, open businesses, and to be productive citizens. Whether that was opening a restaurant, working in a plant, or becoming a firefighter. As long as you weren't the police, these were all respected positions for SD members. Essentially, the SDs existed as a brotherhood of Pilsen residents protecting each other from the wild streets of Chicago. But as you would expect, this came with a cost. Members owed a portion of their salary to the highest ranking member, who's known as the King. The King was elected by committee, and it was generally understood that he needed to be rational and to keep members in check. Because of their structure,
they called the leader of their group the King? Okay.
things were pretty smooth and peaceful early on for the SDs. However, then came the year 1964 when new rivals came knocking. Across the train tracks from Pilsen was territory of the infamous Latin Kings. Unlike the SDs, the Kings were on offense, always trying to take over new territory. They'd come to a neighborhood, try to recruit their young members, and if that didn't work, they'd resort to violence. Well, in 64 is when the Kings had their eyes set on Pilsen, so they began sending members into SD territory, hoping to recruit them to the other side. This was the SD's first test, and here's how it went. The Satan disciples got together as one and played defense against the Latin Kings. This is mainly because their rulebook did not permit them to go on offense. As you would expect, this put them at a major disadvantage. Well, this dynamic lasted for a couple of years until one SD member had enough. Let me introduce you to a young man named Agipito Villalobos, also known as Big Aggie. Unlike the mostly passive and low-key SD members, Big Aggie was ultra-aggressive and sometimes violent. Aggie figured that at this rate the SDs would be completely taken over and something needed to change. So he decided to start going on offense by himself in the middle of King's territory. After doing this, he even set up his own SD block on 24th and Washtenaw right in front of his mother's house. This was a bold move and really contradicted the original SD rulebook. Slowly but surely, Aggie was able to recruit new SD members around his block who were willing to play ball. Essentially, he took the Latin King strategy and used it in their own territory. Aggie inspired a new Satan Disciples era, and it definitely paid off. It led to him being elected as the Satan Disciples leader in 1980, known as King Aggie. Right off the bat, King Aggie changed everything as they pushed to expand to new territory by any means. Through demonstrations, they gained a bunch of territory on the south, west, and even in the suburbs of Cicero, Illinois. And instead of working regular jobs, King Aggie encouraged SD members to hit the streets and slang. This is when things got grimy in Pilsen and the SDs were slowly taking over the city. But then came October of 1983 when everything came to a halt. This is when King Aggie caught a robbery charge, which was already his second strike. As a result, he was sentenced to 12 years in Illinois State Prison. Well, unlike the Mexican Mafia, for example, the SDs did not believe in leadership from behind bars. So after he went down, the Satan Disciples needed a new leader. At this time, many of the original members were not too thrilled about the direction of the gang. Members were losing their lives left and right, and the rulebook was no longer being followed. So to change their direction, the Satan Disciples elected a polar opposite leader. This would be a young member named Danny Valencia, also known as Gizmo. Gizmo was a Pilsen native who hated the way his neighborhood had become. He wanted to bring the SDs back to their original form and to reduce violence on the streets. So right off the bat, members started to get jobs and stop attacking rivals for no reason. For 12 years, Gizmo guided the SDs back to a brotherhood and they became a somewhat legal business. But then everything began falling apart. In September of 1995, King Aggie returned to the streets of Chicago. When he got home, he expected everyone to revere him like the old days. However, this was not the response he got. Time had passed and this new generation was ultra loyal to Gizmo. Well, regardless, by the book, King Aggie was supposed to resume his position as the leader. So Aggie returned as the king and Gizmo was now his second in command. Well, during the first couple of months, King Aggie realized that he couldn't tell everyone what to do. And even worse, he realized that the young members were still only listening to Gizmo.
Yeah, cause nigga, ain't nobody trying to motherfucking be on crash dummy missions. Fuck, you just did 15 or 12, however long you had to do. Niggas trying to motherfucking get some money. Fuck around with Buddy.
As you would expect, this made him upset, so he decided to call an SD meeting. November 1st, 1995. SD members meet up at King Aggie's house on West 24th. At 6 p.m., about 15 members arrive at his house and they all sit around his dining room table. They discuss what's going on and why there's a major disconnect. During the meeting, a member blurts out that they're all upset that he's using their tax money to fund activities they don't approve of, aka spending money on sliding on the Latin Kings rather than helping out SD members. King Aggie brushes off the comment until the member gets frustrated. So the member stands up and yells that if he doesn't change, they're gonna vote him out and re-elect King Gizmo. Silence overtakes the room. King Aggie instantly ends the meeting and sends everyone home. So everyone goes their separate ways and King Aggie sits in his room and thinks. As you would expect, he's furious.
He want spank shorty. He want spank shorty that just called him out.
He decides to come up with a plan. 9:41 p.m. King Aggie calls up Gizmo and tells him to come back to his house. He tells him that they need to talk and set some things straight. Gizmo thinks nothing of it and hops in his car. At 10 p.m. he arrives at Aggie's house and walks down the side entrance. As he walks to the door, he notices two men in front of him, and before he can do anything, the Pilsen community was devastated by the loss. On top of this, so many SD members were loyal to Gizmo because he treated them well. At first, everyone was confused. How did this happen to Gizmo? There's no way that King Aggie did this, or is there? The next morning, King Aggie coincidentally took a flight to Dallas, Texas. Here is where he decided to hide out with extended family. Well, because the incident occurred on his property, he was obviously the suspect number one. The only problem was that Chicago police could not find him. However, they did find suspect number two. This would be King Aggie's right-hand man, known as Vicious Trejo. Due to forensic evidence and witnesses coming forward, Vicious Trejo was sentenced to 30 years, all while King Aggie was nowhere to be found. But then in May of 1996, the FBI was able to locate him in Dallas. King Aggie's case was a major deal in Chicago as he had become a completely infamous character. Everyone figured that his case was an easy conviction, but not so fast. During the trial, King Aggie's neighbor took back her statements that she saw him do it. Why she took it back, you can only imagine. But for this reason, King Aggie walked away as a free man. Right after his release, he figured that he could come back and remain the king.
What?
Bro has zero self-awareness whatsoever. But yeah, as soon as he got back, he quickly realized that everyone wanted him gone. From what we know, King Aggie was never seen again in Chicago. Well, after the passing of Gizmo, everything fell apart for the SDs. All structure went out of the window, members started doing whatever they wanted, and even became each other's biggest rivals. And that takes us to 1999. By this time, the Satan disciples had spread all over the city. One of these territories would be on the west side, specifically Garfield Park. Here is where a reputed member named Teodoro Baez resided in his upstairs apartment. Teodoro was known as Mandingo, a dangerous member who was liable
Hey, yo.
to trip on anyone. Mandingo operated with his right-hand man, a man by the name of Juan Estrada. Together, the two got money and applied pressure on anyone who got in their way. Well, in early August, Juan began getting frustrated with Mandingo over unpaid debts. From what we know, Teodoro owed Juan $1,000. So finally, Juan decided to confront Mandingo. August 5th, 1999. It's a hot summer morning and Juan calls up Mandingo and tells him that they need to meet. Mandingo tells him to pull up to his apartment. So Juan gets ready and tells his girlfriend Janet to drive him there. They arrive at 11 a.m. and Juan gets out of the car and walks up to the apartment. The friends sit down and start talking about the situation. Mandingo repeatedly tries to change the topic, but Juan is not going for it. He eventually gets frustrated and starts calling Mandingo out of his name. First he calls him a custer and then he calls him a snuva. No, I'm just kidding. He actually stands up and calls him a bitch in an aggressive manner. At this point, Mandingo sees red, despite the fact that Juan is his friend and fellow SD member. So he stands up, whips out the blicky, and he hits his leg and Juan begins to scream. And that's when Mandingo unfortunately grabs his samurai sword. Right after doing this, he remembers that Juan came with his girlfriend, so he walks down to her car and casually tells her to come upstairs. Of course, she thinks nothing of it, so she follows his directions. Sadly, this is where she meets her fate.
That's crazy.
Juan and Janet were discovered in the Chicago River 3 days later. After searching phone records, they figured out that Teodoro Baez was Juan's last call, so they brought him in for questioning on August 27th, 1999. At the questioning, Mandingo realized that the police had no evidence. Regardless though, he decided to tell them everything he did.
At first, I tried to negotiate with him, and then when I felt negotiation was not possible, I reacted in a truly hostile manner.
So of course he was instantly charged and it made the national news. His arrest shocked everyone in the SD community as they could not believe what he had done. His fellow members were pissed and he knew what they could do to him. So after just 2 weeks in jail, Mandingo wrote letters to the judge begging to be placed in protective custody. At first they denied his request, but then after 3 consecutive letters, they finally granted him PC for the rest of his stay. The case was a major deal in Chicago and the DA pushed for the hardest consequences as possible. All in all, Teodoro Baez was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Many SD members still
So they going PC the whole time. That's crazy.
Incidents like this to King Aggie. They blame him for ruining the structure and making it okay for members to cross out their own brothers. Well, from here, everything got worse and worse for the Satan disciples. The new era was unrecognizable, one that would have King Gizmo rolling in his grave. Well, this is when a new member would step up to the leadership position. This would be a young man named Tommy Parra, known as Tommy Guns. Unlike the previous leaders, Tommy was all about money and would do anything to get it. Once he assumed the leadership position, he began doing something that was far against the SD rulebook. He began doing business with the gangster disciples, specifically the Rockwell Gardens. SD members were supposed to keep money in-house and expand from within, but Tommy knew that teamwork makes the dream work, so he decided to violate the rulebook. In 2001, Tommy and his trusted associates began getting money with the GDs and Rockwell
So we went from 1999 to 2001.
Gardens. In 1 year, they ran up more money than any member in Satan Disciples history. But it would also become Tommy's biggest downfall. In 2002, Chicago police opened an investigation into the GDs in the Rockwell Gardens. While spying on the projects, they noticed something very strange.
You know, Smart Water found a smart way to do water. What else can we make smart?
There's one guy who's always here who doesn't look like the rest. So police turned their focus away from the GDs and they started focusing on Tommy. They began tracking his every move and using SD informants to get information. And after just 1 month of investigating, Tommy and 2 associates were arrested. Now listen to this. After his arrest, police discovered that Tommy's father was actually a Chicago police captain. This was against the SD rules, but it was also
Man, they got rats, real rats.
opening to Chicago police. Either way, they didn't look into his father and Tommy was sentenced to 25 years. Yes, you heard that correctly, 25 years and he didn't even hurt a soul. At this point, this was back-to-back leaders who had broken major rules, so why should members follow anything they say?
25 and your father's a fucking chief, he said?
Sadly, this mentality led to the Satan disciples making terrible decisions. September 6, 2010. It's a Sunday evening on 24th and Washtenaw, the one SD block in Little Village. On this afternoon, a member named Luis Patton is hanging out on the block. That's when a car full of 2 women double parks on 24th. Luis gets suspicious that they're Latin kings, so he walks up to the car. He asks them if they're Latin kings, to which they respond, "No, we're girls," and they start giggling. Luis unfortunately takes this as disrespect. The incident sparked major outrage in the community, and rightfully so. However, Luis Patton would not be arrested for 3 more years. In the meantime, even his own side was disappointed in what he had done. Specifically, a member named Robert Vela was extremely disappointed. Robert was one of the original members on 24th, known as Bobby D. At this point, Bobby had moved to the South Chicago suburb of Midlothian where he raised his family. However, when he heard about the incident, he decided to go back to his original block to straighten things out. And that takes us to October 30th, 2010. Bobby arrives at
Wait, what?
7 p.m. and he posts up on the block with some younger members. As he's talking to the members, a man is creeping up from behind the buildings, and that's when the man walks behind Bobby.
That's crazy.
This was a huge deal in the SD community and a lot of members were pissed.
So y'all taking out the old niggas. Y'all taking out all the originals. That's crazy.
Chicago police knew that this could spark a major retaliation for whoever had done this. They figured that this was revenge from the Latin Kings for the September 6th incident. But after talking to Latin Kings members, they realized that this was not the case at all. Instead, they started looking into the SDs. Maybe this was an inside job. And what do you know, SD informants told police that it was a fellow SD member from 24th. However, because the case is sealed, we don't know exactly who it was. But I'm sure you can make an educated guess, especially after this next incident. It's 2012 and Louise Patton is still on the streets acting as wild as ever. February 18th, 2012. Louise Patton is driving around the Latin Kings territory looking for any rivals he can find. At 4 p.m. while driving down California Avenue, he notices a car full of Latin Kings members going the other way. So he instantly busts a U-turn and speeds down California to catch up. He then pulls directly in front of the car and corners them in. That's when he rolls down his window. Due to surveillance footage, Luis was arrested quickly after. And after recovering his blicky, police were able to tie it to the September 6th incident as well. After a long trial, Luis was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
And then shit like I said, bro, shit like that, when I heard shit like that, like... I just think you niggas just... Cleeds, man. You guys are really just cleeds. Like, y'all niggas love men. Like, y'all love them. I don't want to be around men all my life, bro.
Well, these kinds of incidents further the rivalry between the SDs and the Latin Kings. However, these weren't their only rivals. Although the Kings were their most hated, the SDs also despised another local gang. This would be 2-6, a little village gang who started out on 26th. Since the 1980s, the SDs and 2-6 have been bitter
Nissan Cup Noodles. Stir fry? Takeout style noodles.
rivals fighting over little village territory. And that takes us to August of 2015. As you know, the SDs have always been encouraged to get legal jobs. And for two members, this meant working security for a towing company, making sure the repo man is safe. The two men are Carlos Cregan of Whitting, Indiana, and Jonathan Rodriguez of Calumet, Illinois. Well, because this is a standby profession, the members can do whatever they want until they get dispatched to a scene. And that takes us to August 22nd, 2015. The two SD members are on standby in the Clearing neighborhood of Southside Chicago. After being bored sitting in their car, they decide to drive to a bar on West 63rd. At the bar, they start chopping it up with a random guy named Leonardo Morales. This lasts until 2 a.m. when the bar closes and they walk outside. This is when they get a call that a driver is having issues with a repo and they need to assist him on the scene. So instantly they hop in their truck and they ask Leonardo if he wants to tag along for fun. He agrees and together the three head to the
random nigga you just met at the bar? Tag along? While y'all got jobs to do?
scene. Well, long story short, they break up the argument and it's just another regular day at work. After this, Leonardo asks if they can give him a ride home. The SD members agree and they all hop in Jonathan's car. During the car ride, Leonardo starts to talk about his past. He tells them that he used to be a 2-6 member before he changed his life. The energy in the car shifts as the two SD members look at each other in the front seat. Without saying a word, they simply nod at each other and drive down to a nearby alley. At this point, Leonardo is confused and he asks them if there's a problem. The members tell him that they're just tired and they need to take a smoke break. When they get to the alley, they ask Leonardo if he can join them. He agrees and steps out of the car. And that's when the unexpected occurs. The members hop in their truck and speed home. Little did they know
they did this shit with a work truck. That's a tow truck.
The neighbors above the alley witnessed it happen. And just like that, they were both raided and booked into Cook County Jail.
Cook County.
Incidents like this are what have given the Satan disciples a terrible reputation over the last 10 years. And unfortunately, it doesn't stop here. As you know, the SDs rival the Latin Kings in 2-6, but they also rival another large section in Chicago as well. This happens to be the Almighty Saints, the most active gang in the back of the yards neighborhood. For many years, they could be considered the SD's fourth biggest rival, but then starting in 2016, they moved up to number 1, and it all started with a devastating move from the Satan Disciples. December 26, 2016. It's a cold winter day in Chicago, but the holiday season brings joyous times. On this day, a man named Jamil Al-Shabi is walking his dogs around the neighborhood after visiting with family. Jamil's family happens to live in the back of the yards neighborhood, specifically around Davis Park. This just so happens to be Almighty Saints territory, known as Halo City. Halo City is rivals with an SD section across the train tracks, known as No Love City. And on this day, one of the members has no love. 5:45 p.m. An SD member named Hector Aguirre is driving around Halo City looking for rivals. He can't find anyone outside on this freezing day. That's until he arrives to Davis Park, where he notices Jamil walking his dogs. He instantly thinks he's a Saints member, so he hops out of his car and runs to the park. Bam! As it turns out, Jamil had nothing to do with the Almighty Saints,
Bro, niggas gotta stop doing goofy shit. Like, niggas gotta stop be pumped up on them drugs, doing wild, goofy shit. Like, you don't get no respect killing random, innocent people. Your rank don't go up. You ain't an outstanding member. Fuck, like, y'all niggas be blowing me when y'all do gay shit like that, bruh. You killing unarmed people that got nothing to do with nothing. Because in your mind, you want bullshit. You thinking, oh man, it gotta be him. It gotta. Have you never seen a nigga before? Stop just assuming things, bruh. You niggas is weird, bro.
Making the situation worse. And even though he wasn't a member, the Almighty Saints were offended that the rivals would even do this. The Saints would not take this lightly, and from here, things would get nuts. Over the course of the next year, the Almighty Saints went at the SDs with no remorse. During this period,
progress always has a partner. With exploration, there's collaboration. With every
3 high-ranking members lost their lives. Lazy D, Grizzly D, and Smokey D all gone in 2017. The beef would go back and forth all over Southside Chicago, way worse than O Block versus 63rd. After this, you could argue that the Almighty Saints had become the SD's biggest rival, and that's because it even expands beyond the streets. February 1st, 2020. On this day, a reputed SD member named Christian Gonzalez is booked into Cook County Jail. After processing, Christian is placed in a cell with a random cellmate. So he's brought to a cell, he walks in, and he looks at the man sitting on the bunk. Instantly, they both freeze. That's because his cellmate happens to be a reputed Saints member named Pedro Ruiz. If you're familiar with jail, you know that this is never supposed to happen. Rival members can never be in the same cell. Regardless, once they're locked in, there's no going back. Well, what exactly happens next, we don't know, but here's the result. The next morning, Pedro Ruiz is found in his cell. Wildly enough, Christian
I'm gonna call you in a second, baby.
Gonzalez had nothing but a soap bar. I'll spare you the details, but this was alarming for Cook County Jail. The negligence of the workers to let this occur is beyond me. And sadly, this is just the common reality of Chicago, one of America's most dysfunctional cities. On paper, the Satan Disciples are one of the most dangerous crews in Chicago, but you just never hear them in the media. This is despite the fact that they have talented rappers. Starting around 2018, a small section between 50th and 51st gained some relevance. This is due to a talented rapper named 050 Shooter, who's way better than I expected. And by his side was a rapper named Lil Icky, who unfortunately lost his life to the Latin Kings. 050 Shooter can often be seen on Instagram Live dissing the rivals and talking his shit. Guys like him are the perfect example of why the Satan disciples are the real EBK of Chicago. They don't get along with anyone and should definitely be avoided at all costs. On that note, that's gonna do it for this episode of Swamp Stories. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe.
Let's go check this shit out next.